Once upon a time, in the beautiful city of Ayad, there lived a boy named Leon who never regarded others. He was so rude and disrespectful that people shook their heads whenever he walked by. He would beat up his poor grandmother whenever she tried to correct him, and even left home for days as a way of punishing her, knowing how worried she would be that he didn't return. His mother died while giving birth to him, and her mother took on the responsibility of raising him. However, owing to the way his mother died, his grandmother did all she could to avoid situations that would make him miss his dead mother, so she allowed him to get away with so many unruly behaviors. As Leon began to grow, he became so disrespectful and out of control. She would cry herself to sleep every night, praying that her grandson would one day change his ways. But Leon was not ready to change his ways. But Leon was not ready to change. He always got himself into trouble that often required his grandmother to spend huge amounts of money to bail him out. One morning, Leon strolled into the nearby market. He saw an old woman who was selling oranges by the roadside. Without asking, Leon grabbed some oranges and stuffed them into his bag. The old woman pleaded with him to pay for the fruits. "My son, please pay. These oranges are all that I have," she said to Leon, who laughed in her face and asked what she was going to do if he refused to pay. "What will you do if I don't pay? Will you come and take them from me?" he asked the old woman mockingly, as he kicked her basket with his foot. Oranges scattered across the dusty road, and the old woman fell to her knees and began to pick them up with her trembling hands. People in the market gathered around and began to shout angrily at Leon. "Shame on you, Leon! Have you no heart?" But Leon did not care. He bit into one of the oranges and walked away laughing without a care. Leon was extremely stubborn. He had no respect for anyone and believed he was untouchable because of the kind of friends that he kept. He once laughed at an old man who was crossing the road with his walking stick. Leon continued to mock the elderly man, imitating his slow, shaky movements and laughing so loudly that passers-by stared in disbelief. "Look at him!" Leon shouted. "Is he walking or dancing?" he said as he laughed. The old man, hurt but calm, paused and looked at Leon with his sad eyes. "Young boy, remember this day. Every action has its consequences. You cannot run from them forever," he said to Leon, who only rolled his eyes and walked away. He had no respect for anyone, and his grandmother bore the brunt of his cruelty daily. One evening, Leon's grandmother managed to save a small amount of money after weeks of hard labor. She hid it under her mattress, hoping to buy food and medicine. But Leon discovered the money and stole it. He used it to gamble with his friends. When she confronted him tearfully, he yelled at her angrily and asked what she was planning to do with the little change. "Is it because of that little money that you are stressing me out?" he asked his grandmother, who broke down in tears and began to cry. She was so devastated, knowing that she had no money left to feed them for the rest of the week. All she worked for weeks, was gone within a flash, and this broke her, knowing that her grandson was leading a very destructive life. That night, Leon's grandmother knelt by her bedside, tears streaming down her face. She lifted her trembling hands to the heavens and cried out, "Oh God, please touch my grandson's heart. Let him see the error of his ways before it's too late." But Leon, oblivious to his grandmother's pain, was out with his friends, gambling and drinking, without a single care in the world. The next evening, Leon and his friends were passing by the mortuary at Ring Road. He dared them to sneak into the mortuary, not caring how sacred it was. "Let's go and see the dead bodies. I hear they keep them stacked like firewood," Leon said as the others laughed. Leon, who was always eager to prove how brave he was, convinced them all to sneak into the mortuary. They went in through the back, and an unsettling silence filled the space. Metal tables lined the room, and lifeless bodies lay covered with white sheets. But instead of feeling fear or respect for the dead, Leon began to laugh hysterically. "Look at them stiff like dried fish. What a waste," he said, pulling back one of the white sheets to mock the lifeless body of a woman that lay beneath. The mortuary attendant, hearing some weird noises, walked in to find Leon laughing and mocking the dead. "Young man," the attendant said quietly, his voice filled with anger, "you have mocked the dead today, but mark my words, the dead do not forget. Leave this place now before I call the authorities." Leon and his friends burst into laughter again, completely ignoring the old man's warning. "Old man, go back to your ghosts. You can't scare us," Leon sneered, waving his hand dismissively. But just as they turned to leave, Leon stopped in his tracks. With a mischievous grin, he turned back to the lifeless body of the woman he had mocked earlier. "Look at her lying there like she owns the place," he said mockingly. Then, in an act of sheer disrespect, Leon touched the woman's breast, laughing loudly as his friends gasped in shock. The mortuary attendant's face went pale as he murmured under his breath, "May the dead have mercy on you, boy." The group ran out of the mortuary, still chuckling, but a strange silence seemed to follow them out into the bustling streets of Iade. That night, Leon could not sleep. His room, usually warm and stuffy, felt ice cold. He tossed and turned on his thin mattress, his eyes darting nervously around the dark corners of the room. Suddenly, he heard a faint whisper. "Leon." He sat up, sweat dripping from his head. "Who is there?" he said, his voice trembling. The whisper came again, this time even louder. "You are mine," the voice said. Leon sat there, terrified. He turned on the light but saw no one. "Was I dreaming?" he asked himself as he felt a hot slap across his face. Leon immediately lost his ability to speak. He did everything possible to speak, but his mouth seemed numb and unable to say a word. He approached his grandmother's room, his trembling hands clutching the doorframe as saliva dripped uncontrollably from his mouth. His grandmother sat up in alarm when she saw him standing there, his wide eyes filled with terror and his lips quivering as if trying to form words. "Leon, what's wrong?" "Talk to me," she cried, rushing to him. But Leon could only make incoherent sounds, his mouth refusing to obey him. His grandmother grabbed his face, her eyes scanning with concern. "Did someone hurt you, Leon? Speak to me." Leon shook his head violently, tears streaming down his face. His grandmother's panic grew. She led him to sit on the edge of her bed, praying softly underneath her breath. "God of mercy, whatever is wrong with my grandson, please have mercy. Please, Lord." That night, Leon sat by his grandmother's side, unable to sleep, unable to speak, and unable to escape the oppressive cold that seemed to cling to his skin. The next morning, word spread around the neighborhood that Leon had lost his ability to speak. His friends from the mortuary incident came to visit him, their faces pale with fear. One of them whispered, "This is not normal. That mortuary attendant warned us. I knew we shouldn't have gone there. But it was only the beginning of Leon's torment. Whenever he closed his eyes, he saw the face of the dead woman, her pale skin and hollow eyes staring at him, her lips moving silently. Objects in their small home began to move on their own. Pots fell from the shelves, the door creaked open at night, and shadows danced in corners where they should not have been. His grandmother began to hear whispers in her sleep, faint voices calling Leon's name. As the days passed, Leon's condition worsened. He lost so much weight because of his inability to eat properly. People began to gossip as they wondered what had happened to him. Some believed he had contracted a deadly disease, whilst others believed that he was cursed. They mocked him, and Leon, feeling so dejected, began to live a life of isolation. His grandmother did everything to help him, but nothing that she did worked. All the doctors that examined Leon found nothing wrong with him. As Leon's condition worsened, his grandmother grew desperate. His frail body was barely able to move, and his once proud and loud demeanor was now reduced to hollow stares and incoherent sobs. One evening, a kind elderly neighbor named Auntie Grace paid a visit to Leon's grandmother. The soft glow of an oil lamp cast long shadows on the walls as they sat in the quiet living room. She had heard whispers in the market about Leon's encounter with the dead woman at the mortuary and came to offer advice. "My sister, this is not an ordinary sickness. Take your grandson back to where this problem started. The dead do not forgive easily when disrespected," Auntie Grace said firmly, as Leon's grandmother shook her head in agreement. The cool night air seemed to carry the weight of their worry. They arrived at the mortuary the next morning, the dawn light casting eerie shadows on the building's cracked walls. They met the attendant, whose name was Elder Bayo, the same man who warned Leon about his reckless behavior. He stood at the entrance of the mortuary as though he had been waiting for them to arrive. His sharp eyes scanned Leon's trembling body as he shook his head in disappointment. "I warned you, young man," Elder Bayo said in a low voice, "for you mocked the dead, and now you have awakened something that cannot be easily silenced." His grandmother began to plead with him to help her grandson. "Please, Elder, help my grandson. Whatever it takes, we will do it. Please don't let him die like this." Elder Bayo sighed deeply, his weathered face etched with a mixture of sadness and resolve, and gestured for them to follow him inside. They were led to a small room lined with old shelves and flickering candles that cast an otherworldly glow. A faint smell of incense lingered in the air, adding to the room's somber atmosphere. Elder Bayo sat on a wooden stool as he muttered a few words under his breath. He then looked directly at Leon as he began to speak. "I have a gift," he began. "A gift that allows me to speak to spirits caught between this world and the next. The woman he disrespected, her spirit has spoken to me." His grandmother gasped, clutching her chest as her grandson sat staring blankly, his hollow eyes fixed on Elder Bayo. "The woman you mocked and touched was not just any corpse. Her name was Abeni. She died with deep sorrow in her heart. She had no family, no husband, and no children. She passed away from a broken heart, carrying the weight of loneliness into the grave. Her spirit cannot find rest because she was denied love and companionship in life." Elder Bayo's voice dropped lower. "She has chosen you, Leon, to be her husband." His grandmother gasped again, her hand flying to her mouth. "What do you mean, Elder? My grandson marry a dead woman?" Elder Bayo nodded solemnly. It is the only way. Ebony's spirit has demanded marriage. Leon must marry her, give her a proper burial with honor, and visit her grave regularly as her husband. Only then will her spirit rest, and only then will Leon be freed from this curse. Leon's grandmother wept bitterly, her frail body shaking as she clutched her grandson's hands. Leon himself, though unable to speak, let out a muffled sob as tears rolled down his face. Before proceeding with the spiritual marriage, Elder Bayo advised them to seek out Abeni's family, if any existed. After days of inquiry in the community and speaking with elders, it was confirmed that Abeni had no living family members. She had been an only child, abandoned by distant relatives, and had died alone in a small rented room. The weight of loneliness and betrayal had taken her to the grave. Realizing there was no family to give their blessings, Elder Bayo told them that the marriage must proceed without delay. Under Elder Bayo's guidance, preparations began. A small white wedding gown was placed over Abeni's lifeless body, and her hair was adorned with flowers. Leon, weak and trembling, was dressed in a white agbada representing purity and submission. Elder Bayo began the ceremony, his voice echoing in the cold mortuary room. Abeni, daughter of the earth, you are not forgotten. Today you are not forgotten. Today you are loved. He guided Leon to kneel beside Abeni's body. With a trembling hand, Leon placed a ring on her lifeless finger. A cold breeze swept through the room, and for a brief moment it felt as though the air was filled with a faint, sorrowful sigh. Elder Bayo sprinkled holy water and salt over Abeni's body and whispered final blessings. It is done. Her spirit is now at peace. The next day, a proper burial ceremony was held for Abeni. A small gathering of people attended, led by Elder Bayo. Abeni was laid to rest in a quiet cemetery at the outskirts of the town. The sound of a soft hymn filled the air as Leon, still weak but able to whisper faint words, now stood beside her grave. I am so sorry, Abeni, for disrespecting you. May you find the peace that you were denied in life. He placed fresh, white flowers on her grave and walked away with his grandmother, his head bowed low. Elder Bayo warned Leon that although Abeni was now at rest, their connection was forever. As her husband, Leon was obligated to visit her grave occasionally, bring fresh flowers, and whispering prayers for her soul. If you neglect her grave, if you forget your promise, the curse will return, even stronger. Leon nodded solemnly, knowing that he could never escape his obligation. In the months that followed, Leon transformed into a completely different person. He became quiet, humble, and deeply respectful of others. He worked hard to support his grandmother, spending hours each day tending to their small farm and making repairs around the house. He apologized to her for all that he had done to hurt her in the past. Leon also strolled to the market to find the old woman whose oranges he had tossed to the ground months ago. He found her by the corner, her face lined with age and weariness, and apologized to her for how he had treated her on that fateful day. The old woman looked up at him as tears fell down her eyes. She forgave him for all that he did, and Leon thanked her for her kindness. He handed some money over to her as payment for the oranges, and the old woman was so grateful as she began to bless him fervently. Every month, without fail, Leon also visited Abeni's grave. He placed fresh flowers on the grave and whispered some prayers for her. People in the town began to notice the change in him. They spoke in hushed tones about the boy who had once mocked the dead, but was now living a changed life. Leon has changed life. Leon has changed, they would say, revealing how the dead had taught him a lesson that he would never forget. And Leon truly never forgot. For the rest of his life, he carried the weight of his actions and the memory of Abeni the bride he never truly knew but was forever bound to in spirit. In the quiet cemetery at the edge of the town, a gravestone stood with the words Abeni, beloved and remembered, rest in peace. And every month a young man named Leon would kneel before it, honoring a promise made in fear, but kept in love. The story of Leon teaches a powerful lesson. Every action, no matter how small or insignificant it seems, carries consequences. Leon's arrogance, disrespect, and reckless behavior not only brought suffering to himself, but also to those around him, especially his grandmother. His mockery of the dead and disregard for human dignity triggered a curse that nearly cost him his life. This serves as a stark warning that arrogance and ignorance often lead to regret, and one cannot escape the consequences of their actions forever. However, Leon's story also shows that redemption is possible. By acknowledging his wrongs, seeking forgiveness, and making amends, he transformed into a humble and kind-hearted person. This change reminds us that no matter how far someone has strayed, they can choose a different path and become better. Thank you for watching my channel. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more interesting and thought-provoking stories. See you in the next video.
As she was walking, she heard a strange sound. When she turned around, to her greatest shock, she saw Ethan transforming into a half-human and half-snake. She quickly hid behind the tree so he could not see her when he turned around. Mila was so terrified and shaky. She tried her possible best not to scream or make any noise. No, no, no. Once upon a time, there lived a beautiful princess named Lyra. She was the only child of her father. Her father, the king, adored and cherished her so much. Whatever she asked for, he never hesitated to grant to her. Elle had a maid named Mia, who she was very close to. They were like siblings. Anyone who didn't know them might think they were siblings. Elle was a very beautiful girl, admired by all the eligible young men in their village and across. Kings from other villages would always bring their sons to marry Lee, but she would decline, saying she didn't like any of them. Her father, the king, was worried about his daughter Laren. He asked her why she always turned down her suitors. She told him that when she saw a man she truly loved, she would bring him home. Her father, the king, accepted and told her to choose her suitor wisely. Oh. One day, Lyre and her maid, Mia, were strolling down the village, enjoying the vibrant market stalls and the chatter of villagers, when a very handsome young man approached them. He was so handsome that no woman could resist his handsome face and his captivating smile. He turned to Lyre and said, "You are so beautiful, like the morning sun. Your beauty could make a blind man see." He kept on showering praises on Lyre, and this made her blush. Lyra smiled and asked him who he was. He replied, saying his name was Nate, that he's from the neighboring village, and that he came to get some fresh fruits from the market. Ethan then told the princess that he would be taking his leave to go to the market to get the fruits before the market women sold all the fresh fruits. As he was about leaving, Elle told him if they could meet another day. He smiled and said, Anything for you, my princess." Then he left. When he left, Mia, the princess's maid, smiled and asked Lyra why she requested to see him again. Lyra told her that she thought she had finally found the one she loved. They both laughed and left. On their way home, Lyra kept on describing the handsome face of Nate. The next morning, Lyra, the princess, could not hold back her excitement. She called Mia and told her to accompany her to see Nate. Mia smiled and teased her, saying, "I know you did not sleep last night because of Nate." The princess replied and said to Mia, "No woman in her right senses would see Nate and not think of him all night." The princess and her maid then went back to the same spot where she met Ethan to wait for him. Soon, Ethan arrived, dressed in a simple tunic that accentuated his charm. The princess was so happy to see him that as Mia was about leaving to give them some privacy to discuss, she noticed that Nate was barefooted, and she also remembered that the last time she saw him, he was also barefooted. After the princess and Nate finished discussing and having their lovely moment, Ethan was about to take his leave when the princess told him she would like to escort him to his village, but he declined and left. When Ethan had left, Mia told the princess that she noticed Ethan was always barefooted. The princess told Mia maybe he just didn't like wearing footwear. Mia told her, "Who on earth doesn't like wearing footwear?" Mia was unsettled. She was having a bad feeling about Ethan, but did not say anything to the princess. The princess kept on seeing Nate for some time, and when he declared his intentions of marrying her, Lyra was so happy that finally he had said what she had waited patiently to hear from him for so long. She took Nate to her father, the king, who accepted that Nate could marry his daughter if that would make her happy. Ethan told the king that he would be coming with his people for the marriage rites. When Ethan left the palace, Mia visited the princess in her room to discuss with her. She told her she was not comfortable with her marrying Ethan, that she didn't even really know him, and that they had not visited his village before, let alone seen his family members. The princess told Mia not to worry, that Nate meant no harm and was a nice person. The next day, Nate visited Princess Lyra in the palace and was about leaving when the princess insisted Mia should see him off back home with a fruit basket. Ethan declined and insisted on carrying the fruit basket by himself, but the princess insisted that her maid Mia carry it for him. That princess insisted that her maid Mia carry it for him. On their way to Nate's village, they reached a bush path shaded by towering trees, and Nate then told Mia that she could now go back and no longer accompany him. He thanked her for escorting him, and they both parted ways. When Mia had walked a few minutes, she realized she was still carrying the fruit baskets and had forgotten to give them to Ethan. She hurriedly went back to give it to him, but could not find him. She was surprised not to find Ethan because they had just parted a few minutes ago. She then decided to walk down the bush path further to see if she could find Ethan. As she was walking, she heard a strange sound. When she turned around, to her greatest shock, she saw Ethan transforming into a half-human and half-snake. She quickly hid behind the tree so he could not see her when he turned around. Mia was so terrified and shaky, she tried her possible best not to scream or make any noise. Ethan then walked further into the thick bush until he was out of sight. When Mia realized that he had left, she ran as fast as her legs could carry her back to the palace. She went straight to the princess's room to tell her what had happened. What? Mia hesitated over her next words for the next few minutes, but until he said, the princess was very angry at Mia. She said to her, "I know you've been having bad feelings about me marrying Ethan, so why go to this extent of lying to me about him, saying he's a monster? You know my marriage is a few days from now, and you're trying to ruin it." Mia turned to the princess with tears in her eyes and said, "Please listen to me as a friend and not a maid. I wouldn't want to destroy your marriage or plan evil for you. We've been friends since childhood. You don't really know this man very well. You've not been to his village before, let alone meeting his family. Princess Elle replied and said to Mia that Nate would be coming with his family to the palace for the marriage rites. Then she would be meeting his family. Mia replied and said to her, "Why don't you come with me and see for yourself? Then, if I am wrong, you can do whatever you want to me." Good. What I do, I saw him turn into a monster. The princess stared at Mia for some time and then accepted to follow her. When they reached the bush path, Princess Elle was becoming scared because the path was so lonely and scary. She then said to Mia, "Why would Nate live in this strange bush path?" Mia told her to follow her and try not to make any noise. They went further into the bush, noticing unusual claw marks on nearby trees, but could not find anything. The princess said to Mia, "You said you saw him turn into a half human and half snake. So where is his house? Because I can't see anybody here. And I don't think anyone would live in this kind of place." Mia said to the princess that she was very sure she saw him turn into a half human and half snake at that very spot. As they were about leaving, they also heard a strange noise from afar. As they turned, they saw Titian as a half human and half snake. The princess was so scared and shocked she let out a loud scream. That was when Ethan realized that both of them had seen him. He chased them. Both the princess and her maid, Mia, ran for their dear lives, but were not able to meet up with them. He then returned back into the forest. When Mia and the princess reached the palace, the princess was panting and breathing so hard with fear. Mia calmed her down. When she was calm, she then apologized to Mia for doubting her and being stubborn. However, Ethan, on the other hand, after realizing that he had been caught, never returned to the palace again. And that was how the princess escaped getting married to a monster. The lesson of this story is always to listen to the advice of your friends and not be stubborn. The lesson from this story is that we should always listen carefully to the advice of those who care about us, especially when they express concerns based on observations or experiences. Blindly following emotions or desires without considering cautionary warnings can lead to unforeseen dangers. Trust and wisdom from friends and loved ones are invaluable in making wise decisions. Thank you for watching my channel. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe for more stories and lessons. See you next time.
There was once a reckless young man named Daniel who inherited a massive fortune from his parents. He spent his days throwing wild parties and surrounding himself with women and friends who enjoyed his wealth. One morning, after a particularly crazy party, when Daniel woke up, he felt so sick, vomiting several times. He was so disappointed that none of his friends stayed back to ensure he was okay. As he sat on the bathroom floor, he felt lonelier than usual. His parents were no more. He had no siblings, and his friends obviously flocked around him for their selfish gains. Suddenly, a strange longing crept over him. He wanted someone who would care about him for who he was, not for what he had. But marriage was out of the question because Daniel did not believe in love. So who could give him the kind of unconditional affection he craved? A child, he said to himself, but he laughed it off because he knew it was impossible, because he was sterile. Daniel was unable to have a child. Years ago, after one of his many careless one-night stands, he contracted chlamydia. By the time he sought treatment, the infection had already damaged his reproductive system, leaving him unable to have children. He burst into tears as he realized how his poor decision had messed up his life. Then, out of the blue, he did something he had not done for many years. God, if you fix my body, I'll make a donation to the church. He repeated over and over, clinging to hope that God would see his desperation. 2 days later, he went to the hospital for his usual health checkup. In faith, he asked the doctor to check his reproductive system. In his heart, he hoped that God had performed a miracle. Later that evening, he received a call from the doctor. "I'm sorry, Mr. Daniel. There is no change. You will not be able to have children." After the call, he burst into tears again. "Of course, God will not help someone like me," he said, amidst his tears. But God had a different plan for him. Weeks later, Daniel received a call from a hospital. A woman named Clara had asked to see him urgently. Daniel was shocked to hear her name after so many years, but he went to the hospital. There, he found Clara, pale and frail, lying on a hospital bed. The room had a faint smell of antiseptics, and the sound of distant beeping machines filled the air. The doctor explained that Clara had cancer and was in the final days of her life. Daniel felt sympathy for her, but could not understand why she had called for him, especially since he had treated her badly during their short relationship years ago. "We have a 4-year-old daughter," Clara said weakly. As briefly as she could, she explained that after their affair, she realized she was pregnant. Not wanting to have anything to do with him, she successfully raised the baby on her own. But now she was ill and thought their daughter, Emma, needed to know her father. Daniel was shocked. Now that his miracle was here, he could not believe God came through for someone like him. Over the next few weeks, he stayed by Clara's bedside. It was the only gift he felt he could give her. Every day, Clara's friend would bring Emma to the hospital, and Daniel always looked at Emma with love. She was his favorite part of his day. They clicked so easily, and every time he held her in his arms, he felt blessed to be holding his own miracle in the flesh. The walls of the hospital room were adorned with handmade drawings from Emma, featuring bright suns and flowers, which added a cheerful touch to the somber atmosphere. After Clara passed away, Daniel became Emma's full-time guardian. His life changed completely. He gave her the best clothes, toys, and even enrolled her in a great school. His days now revolved around work and his daughter, not parties or wild living. However, his friends were not happy with this new Daniel. They missed the Daniel who spent tons of cash at clubs and unnecessary events. "Dan, you're acting funny. I have 3 kids, and I'm not as boring as you," his friend Sam told him one day. Daniel ignored him. Although he missed his party days, he was enjoying the new life he had created for himself. One day, he returned home from school with his daughter, Emma. Just as he was about to enter his house with her in his arms, his neighbor called out to him. Daniel was shocked. She was speaking to him. Yes, it was a luxury estate where people minded their business, but it felt as though this particular neighbor and her husband despised and ignored him because of his wayward lifestyle. "Wow, such a pretty girl," the woman, whose name was Elsie, commented, and Daniel walked toward his gate to speak to her. They greeted and introduced themselves, and Daniel told her that Emma was his daughter. The woman played with Emma and Emma cheerfully smiled back. Just as Daniel was beginning to head inside, the woman said to him, "You have such a precious gift. I hope God blesses me with a child someday." Daniel saw how she immediately became sad. He felt sympathy as he was in that position before. He agreed with her in faith and stayed longer before heading inside so Elsie could play with Emma longer. Days after that, whenever Daniel and Elsie would bump into each other after school runs, she would play with Emma as usual by his gate side. As time went by, she invited him in to see her husband, Henry, and slowly they became family friends. One evening, he received a call from his friend Sam. "Where are you, Daniel? The event has started." Daniel was confused as he had already told Sam that he would not be attending his birthday party, as it was at night and Emma's nanny would have closed for the day. But Sam insisted. "Dude, it's not a club event. It's just a small gathering. I always show up to your events." Sam continued to insist. Daniel realized he was right. Daniel realized he was right. Daniel was silent for a while, thinking of what to do with Emma. Suddenly, he remembered Elsie and Henry. He knew they would love to have Emma for some time, but he was not sure about the timing. He quickly rushed over to them, and they agreed to keep her for a few hours. Immediately, Daniel left for the party, hoping he would be back in about 2 hours. But he was wrong. When Daniel arrived at the party, it was not the small gathering Sam had claimed. It was a club with loads of women and drinks. He wanted to go back, but he decided to go in, stay for an hour, and leave. But Sam had more plans. Coincidentally, during that period, Henry and Elsie had been undergoing a 7-day spiritual cleanse with a spiritualist in quest for a child, as they had tried and failed to conceive in every way. That same evening, just as Daniel dropped off his daughter, the spiritualist came for their usual night prayers. The man sat in silence, claiming to be in communication with his deity. Then he said, "We need a contact to invite your child, who has refused to come, to enter your womb." The couple became confused. They asked him if the millions of money they had paid him was not enough to contact the child they wanted. The man shook his head and said it was only the first step. He then took a long look at Emma, who was absent-mindedly playing in the corner of the living room. The soft glow of a nearby table lamp illuminated her tiny face as she moved her toys around. "What a coincidence that this child is here today. We will use her to reach out to your unborn children." The couple immediately understood what he was implying and refused, saying that the child was their neighbor's. The spiritualist told them that no harm would come to the child. He would give her something to swallow, which would make her unconscious. And in the next 2 hours, they would make prayers while the child went into the spirit world to do the needful, but he was lying. He knew the couple was desperate and wanted to use it as a tactic to get more money from them. As for the substance he wanted Emma to swallow, it was merely a concoction to put a person to sleep, which he carried around alongside his other herbs. Over at the party, Daniel was about to leave when Sam noticed and began to tease him loudly. "Where is the latest nanny in town headed? The party has not even started. The party has not even started." The people around them laughed, and those who knew the old Daniel agreed with Sam. With their constant teasing, Daniel felt his ego being bruised, and decided he would stay a bit longer and show them how to party the Daniel way. He went out and called Henry, telling him there was severe traffic and it would be best if he found a hotel to stay for the night as driving late was a risk. Henry, who answered his phone on speaker, got a thumbs up from his wife, and he told Daniel